First up today is Dr. Stephan Howden. He's a professor of physical oceanography in the University of Southern Mississippi School of Ocean Science and Engineering. Since 2003, he has directed development and operations of USM's Central Gulf of Mexico Ocean Observing System. And he's a jack of all trades, really. He works with buoys, uncrewed systems, high-frequency radars. If it goes in the water, Stephan's pretty much worked with it or is working with it. In 2022, he became the director of the Hydrographic Science Research Center. It's one of only 2 universities in the nation offering a master's degree in hydrographic education. I can't think of a better person. Stephan's been a real champion of education and workforce development since I've known him in his early days in the development of GCOOS. He's a founding member of GCOOS, and he's played an integral role in the development of the organization as we know it today. And his talk today is titled The Central Gulf of Mexico Ocean Observing System. And following his talk, I'll introduce Dr. Tony Knap, our next speaker. So all yours, Stephen. Give me a second here. I'm going to make you the presenter. Okay, take it away.
Thank you, Chris. All right. Okay, so everything's showing now?
Looks great.
Okay, great. So what I'm going to talk today is I'm really going to focus on the development of the Central Gulf of Mexico Ocean Observing System. And we've done a lot of different projects in addition to these, but kind of the core of it is the ocean gliders, the buoy, and high frequency radar. So our observing system was developed to address a gap in ocean observing assets in the northern Gulf of Mexico. So this old GCOOS slide, I've highlighted with this red ellipse the area between the Mississippi River Delta and Cape San Blas in Florida, also known as the Mississippi Bight. And at the time, the only, except for the barrier islands and coastal observing assets, all there were a couple of National Data Buoy Center buoys. So we wanted to address that gap in the Gulf of Mexico. And there are a number of societal issues that an observing system could help address, including harmful algal blooms, shipping and safety of navigation, hypoxia and eutrophication, coastal erosion, the characterization of the seafloor, including the bathymetry, oyster reef sites, pipelines and cables, oil and gas extraction, tourism, and freshwater diversions. And we had a really ambitious vision in the beginning with lots of array of moorings and gliders and HF radar and bottom moorings and episodic aircraft overflights and periodic satellite data. And then, kind of reality set in. So we leveraged a project from the Hydrographic Science Research Center for extending the baseline over which high precision GPS positioning, either real-time kinematic or post-processed kinematic positioning, could be done in the marine environment. And there were 2 projects, one up in the Bay of Fundy and then ours with the buoy down in the northern Gulf of Mexico with the buoy and a set of base stations. And so the buoy was initially deployed in mid-December of 2004. And here's a diagram of it. So this buoy was integrated by GERG. And in addition to a suite of med-ocean sensors, we also had a survey-grade GPS receiver on board. So this was our initial element of this observing system. And it was moored out at the 20-meter isobath offshore of Horn Island. And there was a National Data Buoy Center buoy at the 15-meter isobath. We had base stations at Horn Island, Gulfport, and Stennis. And Katrina kind of wiped out those 2 base stations at Horn Island and Gulfport and moved the buoy, but the buoy survived. And initially, we served our data on our own website, but then we kind of migrated that. So now the data is served at GCOOS, so you can get it from the data portal. You can also get it from Gandalf, the glider data. And the glider data also goes to the IUS glider DAC, and the HF radar data goes to the IUS HF radar DAC. Here's our timeline going from 2004 to the present time. And so we have the buoy that was initially deployed here at the end of 2004. I haven't put on here all the different recoveries and redeployments of the buoy, but just some main things. Like in 2009, we had our buoy hulls modified to accommodate the PMEL MAP CO2 system for ocean acidification work. So that was first deployed in 2009. And then in 2017, the buoy was moved at the request of the Ocean Acidification Program from coastal Mississippi to coastal Louisiana in the hypoxic zone. Our long-range radar efforts began in 2007 with deployments at Henderson Beach State Park in Destin and Gulf State Park in Orange Beach, Alabama. And then we followed that the year after with another station in Gulfport at the port. And that turned out to be, we had some difficulties there operating there. So we moved it in 2009 to Singing River Island, which is off Pascagoula. And then and so we've been operating those. And then finally in 2019, we worked with Fugro. They were funded to put in the radars that Ben will talk about. And we partnered in that to help with some of the installation activities. For in red, I've got the 25 megahertz or standard range radars that we use in the Mississippi Sound. We had a project in 2012 where we put the stations in Pass Christian and Gulfport. And then that project ended in 2014. We removed it. We were funded again in 2016. We put the stations in Waveland, Mississippi and Pass Christian. And then we added through another project, another station in Gulfport in 2021 or 2020 rather. And then in 2023, in 2020, we had the Hurricane Zeta damaged the site where the Pass Christian station was. And we finally found a better spot at the harbor there. So we redeployed, and I'll show pictures of that later. So our long range sites, here's just some pictures. So the Pascagoula site, Orange Beach, and Destin, Florida. So in Henderson Beach, we're on the eastern end of the park, next to, this looks like a picture out of Cape Cod, but you know, this inn here looks like a kind of a Cape Cod inn. So this could be the beach at Cape Cod, but it's not. Orange Beach, Gulf State Park, we're near the big fishing pier. And initially we were here at the Port of Gulfport with the other long range site. And you can see this big crane here that caused some problems with the antenna beam pattern. So we moved that to Singing River Island. So here's that island. It's created with dredge spoils. And we have our transmit and receive antenna here. And so these stations, they measure ocean currents in radial direction, so towards or away from the antennas at different azimuths and different ranges. So here's just snapshots of what we call radials at Pascagoula, from Pascagoula, Gulf, Orange Beach, Gulf Shores, and Destin. And then those are combined. This cartoon illustrates how we do that. If we have at a given location a radial component from, this would be Gulf Shores, Orange Beach, and another one from Pascagoula, we can then estimate the total surface current vector. And so here is an animation to give you an idea of what they look like. These are hourly data, and they start out with few vectors because this is during the time of the Deepwater Horizon, and our central site was down because they were doing a dune replenishment project. And so we had to remove the site, but we were given permission to reinstall when the oil spill happened. So we got it up and running. And so this is just a time series of the currents that we saw. One of the uses of it during the oil spill was that the NOAA ORNR, they had a number of different ocean models, operational models they were using to predict where the oil was going to go. And they used the radar data to kind of determine which model was simulating the currents more accurately to create the next oiling forecast. So now onto the standard range. We started out here with the Gulfport Harbor with the antenna on this structure used to protect utilities from storm surge. Another one at the seawall in Pass Christian Harbor. Our second round of deploying these, we put one at the Silver Slipper Casino here. And this pier is only about 3 or 4 feet above the water line. So we have to evacuate this for every tropical storm or hurricane that comes in the region. And here's one at the Pass Christian Yacht Club. And this one also was fairly vulnerable that we had to evacuate ahead of storms. In our third iteration, we still have the one at the Silver Slipper Casino, but now we have a more secure location at Pass Christian Harbor. We put the electronics cabinet up on a platform to raise another 8 feet above the pier. And this pier is probably about 8 feet or 10 feet above the water. And then at the Port of Gulfport, where we put in the new short regular range system, we also have put the electronics up high. If we have a major hurricane, we'll still evacuate the electronics from these. And this is just to give you an idea of what the data look like from those. This is when we had the 2 stations, and you're going to see this is tide station in Bay St. Louis. This red vector is the winds, and these are the currents from the tides. You can see the tide is flooding, and then the tide starts to ebb, and you can see the currents reverse direction and start flowing out of the sound. And then we also have our gliders. So back in 2008, NOAA and Shell signed a MOA to help use Shell resources to try to improve hurricane intensity forecasts. And so USM joined that collaboration in 2012, and where we helped with piloting some of the NDVC glider. And starting in 2014, we were using our own Slocum glider to participate in the program. And then NAVO got involved, and we have helped with doing both deployments and recoveries of their gliders. And the Gulf Glider Group has grown in size and in institutions. And one of the big focus areas is improving hurricane intensity forecasts, and it involves, these are all the different institutions that have been involved: National Data Buoy Center, Shell, USM, Naval Oceanographic Office, NRL, Mote Marine Lab, Texas A&M, University of South Florida, GCOOS, University of Texas at San Antonio, CESESE in Mexico now, and University of Louisiana Lafayette, and AOML. And I should have put on this slide Fugro, because Fugro has been involved in glider recoveries and deployments as well. And then all this has joined into this larger IUS hurricane glider effort. And so I don't have enough room on the slide to put all the different organizations from RAs to individual institutions, universities, and laboratories that are involved in that. Trying to advance my slide. There we go. Challenges. So here's a timeline of challenges, and in blue are all the tropical storms and hurricanes that have directly struck the Mississippi Bight. And so there's lots of them, and we've had to deal with many issues associated with them, starting with Hurricane Katrina, and the last one that caused a lot of problems was Hurricane Ida. Also, of course, the Deepwater Horizon Macondo well blowout in 2010, created a lot of challenges as well as opportunities. In COVID-19 in 2020, in March 2020, when it really got bad here, coincided with also one of our busiest hurricane seasons we've ever seen, and that created all kinds of logistical challenges as well as all of the physical challenges from all these storms. And to give you a quick view of some of the decision making we have to make, here's Hurricane Sally. So this is 5 p.m. on a Saturday. Here's the forecast. All of our assets are within the 4 to 5 day cone of uncertainty. And our drive out to Orange Beach is about 3.5 hours, and our drive to Destin is about 4.5 hours. And that's, if the traffic's not terrible, and one of the choke points can be Mobile Bay as far as traffic. So we have to make decisions a couple days in advance at least if we're going to evacuate things. And here we are on Sunday. Now the Destin and Orange Beach sites are out of the hurricane warning. They're still in a tropical storm warning. And of course, the storm hits right near Orange Beach on Wednesday. So we did not evacuate. We had taken care of evacuating equipment in Mississippi. We hadn't driven over to Orange Beach to evacuate that equipment, and we had, a direct hit almost. Here is our electronic shed and our transmit antenna laying on the ground. So those are, hurricanes and tropical storms are a ongoing challenge that we face. We're trying to given our resources, we're trying to make things as hurricane proof as possible. And finally, I just want to acknowledge I've had lots of co-I's been involved over the years, staff, graduate students, undergrads, and a lot of collaborators, and I've just put his big group here, the IU's Hurricane Glider team. That's many people at NAVO who've also collaborated. And then I'd like to acknowledge all the funding sources for the program. And finally, I'll take questions if you have any.
Thanks, Stephan. That was really interesting to see the progression since 2005. I know you've had a lot of challenges and opportunities as well. I think, if I'm not mistaken, you had one of the only data sets of instruments that survived Hurricane Katrina. You had an interesting paper out of that one. Can you tell us anything more about that survival?
Well, I mean, one of the 3-meter discus buoys they're expensive to maintain, and you have to have a relatively large vessel to recover and deploy them. But they do pretty well in hurricanes. We did Hurricane Gustav. There was one of the mooring shackles failed, and it ended up on the beach for the hurricane. But they can take a lot of abuse. We've had, another challenge has been strikes by boats, and the buoy can handle quite a bit. We've had like anemometer masts broken off before, and the GPS antenna masts broken off before, but they survive. They can survive vandalism. Smaller buoys like a data well or a hydro level buoy, we and others have had a lot of trouble with vandalism, and it's hard to. And the vandalism mostly is cutting the mooring. And with these 3-meter discus buoys and the 1-inch and 1.5-inch chain, that's just not going to happen. So there is a cost to operating them, but on the other hand, they're very robust.
Thank you. Do we have any other, Nancy? I see that your microphone is on. I'm not sure if you wanted to ask a question.
No, I don't. I had to call in because I couldn't hear.
Okay. Thanks.
I can't
Glad you
see
could join
myself.
us.
No questions here.
Okay. Anybody else? It was so thorough and clear, nobody has to ask anything. Jorge, are you seeing any? That's all I was seeing.
No, I don't see any questions even on the chat.
Okay. Well, thanks, Stephan. We are going, if you can stop sharing your screen, we're going to move on to our next talk. Next up is Dr. Tony Knap. Tony's the director of the Geochemical and Environmental Research Group at Texas A&M. He is a professor of oceanography and the holder of the James Watley Endowed Chair for Geosciences. His work spans topics ranging from ocean biogeochemistry to renewable energy, with ocean and human health as the common thread running across much of his research. Tony and his colleagues started the Risk Prediction Initiative, a partnership between the reinsurance industry, climate scientists, and the International Center for Ocean and Human Health. And before coming to TAMU, he was the founder of the Bermuda Atlantic Time Series for its first 25 years, as well as the PI of the Penularis hydrographic stations, which I was really amazed to learn was the longest continuous ocean time series founded by Henry Stommel in 1954. That's just so cool, Tony, I have to say. He's a global leader in marine chemistry and pollution and a member of the International Steering Committee for the Global Ocean Observing System. So he's been at this game longer than most of us and helped shape the formative years of how IUS came to be. It is impossible to do him justice in this brief introduction, but really it's my pleasure to introduce Tony today as he talks about HF radars at Texas A&M University. All yours, Tony. And Jorge, thank you for advancing the slides.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for having me. And thanks for that introduction. Well, I don't deserve that. But anyway, I'm going to focus mainly on HF radar. As you probably know, we at GERG, we build buoys and we operate a number of buoys as part of the Texas Automated Buoy System. We have 8. We operated 2 at the time of the Flower Garden banks. And one of our hopes is to try to get those back because Flower Garden banks are blind right now. We also have a fleet of gliders. We have 4 buoyancy gliders. We've just ordered 1 more. And right now we have our liquid robotics wave glider that's equipped for pH and CO2 is out at the Flower Garden banks. It was put out on December 6th. It's doing really well. So we're hoping we can keep it out probably for a few more months. But that's a big step for us. We have a motto, which is collect data, not dust. And quite often, a lot of these pieces of equipment are kept in the lab, but they never get out to sea. Can I have the next slide? So this is tabs, and on the right, you can see where they are. They're around the coast of Texas. They were put in strategic locations to help provide some of the modeling that is part of the Texas General Land Office interest in monitoring for oil spills, mainly offshore spills going into Texas. And so we're very thankful to the General Land Office for the funding to keep these buoys going. It's a tremendous asset to the Western Gulf of Mexico. We have different types of buoys depending on the waveform. Steve showed you a 3-meter buoy. Most of our other buoys are 2.25 meters, and we have some spar buoys as well. Very much depends on the waves in the area of what you want to measure. But they measure current speed, wind speed, and direction, etc. So what we want to do is coordinate tabs with HF radars. We had a Autonaut, a wave-powered vehicle built in England, which had an ADCP in it. The point was to get it to go between the buoys and coordinate everything. But we put it out the first time and it sank. So it's filled with water. Anyway, we're repairing it and hopefully it'll get to go out again. Next slide. So this is the HF radar program for the US. And this is prior to our attempt to put HF radar networks in Texas. But you can see the Western Gulf of Mexico, Texas and Louisiana was devoid of radars. Next slide. And these are just a schematic of how the radars work. Ours are about 4.5 megahertz. There's generally a transmit antenna, a receive antenna, and then a place to collect the signals, which are usually air conditioned. There is an opportunity for a single antenna. We got an SBIR with CODAR to build a single antenna and test it in coastal Texas, and it works. So this will be something new. It'll be very helpful because to get permission for one antenna, I'm sorry, it's going to be a lot easier than two. And I think it would be a big step ahead. Next. So what do they do? I think Steve gave a pretty good account of that. But in our case, we get current speed and direction out to about 180 kilometers from the coast. They need to be paired, as I said, with the dual antennas. There are many of them in the United States, and they're internationally installed in 32 countries. And you can find lots of reasons of why they're important. But search and rescue, certainly, Scott Glenn has shown in the East Coast that you can reduce the search pattern for people lost at sea to about 30% of what it would be with an ocean model. Next. So this is our history. So we realized that we were the poor child of the Gulf of Mexico. We didn't have any radars compared to our colleagues. And so we approached the Texas A&M Chancellor Research Initiative and received substantial funds, 1.8 million, to purchase 6 CSON radars, CODAR radars, in 2016, and provided funds also to operate the radars for 3 years. So that was positive. Siting and permitting, as everyone knows, are real issues. And I thought the manual for getting a radar in, you would just go to your local state park, talk to the park people, and put the radars in, and they'd be good. Unfortunately, our state park deputy director thought that parks are for people and not for radars. So they wouldn't let us put any in any of the Texas parks. And that was a giant setback. So we had to find other places. There's also the issue with antiquities. So archaeological surveys have to be done at each site. And that costs between $8,000 to $16,000 now, which is, well, it's necessary. but when you're planning to put a radar in, you've got to think of the time scale that's going to take to get permission. And that's one of the things I think all of us don't understand as well as we can. But we're actually really appreciative to GCOOS, who are now providing ongoing operation support. And it was actually great because it's exactly when the support of the Chancellor's Research Initiative ended. So we didn't have any stoppage in coverage. Next. So we put our radars and the instrumentation for the radars, the electronics in these vans. In Texas, there's a law that says unless something is 11 feet high for hurricane storm surges, you can't really have anything on the coast, although they put houses there. But as far as getting permission for radars, so we went for the van approach, and these vans are movable. Whether you can get to them in time is another story, but we have done that. In fact, Jan van Schmeren pulled a radar for us from one of the sites of the Gulf of Mexico. But these vans are very useful. Unfortunately, they even though they're aluminum or aluminum, they corrode, and so or they get shot at, and because they're air conditioned, the rattlesnakes live under them. So our guys like Andrew Dancer and Kerry Wilden, I'd like to give a shout out to for really supporting this program. Kerry, when she was here, and Andrew continuously, have to go and deal with rattlesnakes, and hopefully they won't get shot. But Texas is a strange place because it really is wilderness. Next. For some of our sites, we've had to use solar power. in Matagorda Island and in Port Mansfield, where the 6th radar is going, there is no power. And so we've had to build a power station. And the next slide. This is one day in 2018. This is GMT. But basically, we produced 19.4 watt hours of solar power with a load of 13.4. And so with the air conditioning and everything else, we have a lot of power. The only problem comes if it's cloudy for a while and the radar is shut down. Next. So this is Matagorda Island. This is so some of you can get in your truck or whatever and go down, and between putting sunscreen on and having a nice day at the beach. In our case, we have to go out by boat, and then we have an ATV on the island, get on the ATV and go out to the site. It's very, very remote, but we have to access it by boat, and that creates a whole load of logistical issues. Next. This is Padre Island. You can see it's, again, incredibly remote. Next. And this is Surfside, Texas. You can see our little van off a power pole and sort of near the coastal road. Next. So these are the 6 sites, 5 of which are working. So they start with Rollover Pass towards the east, and Surfside, the Matagorda Bay Nature Park. It's the one you have to access by boat. Aransas National Wildlife Refuge, Padre Island National Seashore. The last one that's going in is Port Mansfield, and it's taken us a really long time to get permission. As many of you may know, that these areas around southern Texas are it's very, very remote, and security is a giant issue. And so we're fortunate in that some landowners have given us permission to put our radars there, and I can just tell you that no one will mess with them and messing with our radars, so we should be fine. Next. So this is the vectors from the radars, but I think Steve showed some really good information on the vectors and what we get out of them. In our case, the colors are the intensity, and obviously the direction of the arrows and the speed. But they're really remarkable. Next. We also have 2 radars in Quintana Roo as part of our National Academy study. We've been trying to get permission to put these in for a very long time. We thought we had permission, and then we found out we didn't. There's a lot of politics involved, but anyway, now these radars are operating. Next slide. And these are sort of challenging sites. This is the Contoy Park. This island sort of shuts down it's a tourist island, but very controlled. They allow about 150 tourists on the island per day. It's where all of the boobies that hang out in the Gulf of Mexico mate. And so when they're mating, the island is full of boobies, and there are certain things you just cannot do on the island during the mating period. But it turned out to be a perfect site for the radars. And we were lucky because we have to have internet, and the park rangers had no internet or much power. And so we had to put a big solar power station on it and power. So it's a really mutual benefit for all of us. They get internet and we get the access to the radar. Next. So this is what Contoy looks like. It's absolutely beautiful. Hardly any electricity. Next. And this is the UNAM Marine Station in Puerto Morelos. On the bottom left is a lab building, and the radars are situated on top of that. We tried to get them down lower, but we couldn't get permission from the people who own the site towards the left, but they work pretty well. Next slide. So this is fresh off the press. This is a vector pattern from the radars in Puerto Morales. You can see the intensity is around 2.5 or so knots in the center, so we know there's a lot of water that goes through the Yucatan Strait, but it really moves at quite a rate. And this is the site of a major project that a number of us in the Gulf, Steve Howden and others, are involved with, funded by the National Academy for the next 5 years. We have an opportunity to put a radar in Cabo de San Antonio, which is that little point off Cuba on the far west point. We have permission for the federal government. There are some issues within our university about whether they want to risk us going to Cuba or not. So you can imagine if there was a site at the end of that point, what the coverage we would have for that would be just spectacular. So we're trying. We have the radars and we have the antennas. Next. This is what we see as we call this like the whole enchilada, what this could all become, because the Cubans really do want to put 5 radars in. There's also in purple in Florida keys of the radars that USF are operating. And there were 2 that were going to go on platforms in the Gulf that presently are not going to go in, but they were put in by the National Academy. We have the last slide, and I stole this slide from Sharon at SESE. So this is really what can happen. These are the Mexican liras, the National Academy funded radars, and the existing radars. And there's some areas that are not well covered in Louisiana and in Florida. But this is what it could all become. We could have the whole of the Gulf of Mexico, provided we can coordinate the data and the data flow pretty well wired. We have to fill in some places in Mexico, but otherwise, I think that's something to look forward to the future. So I thank Sharon for letting me. Well, she didn't let me steal it. I just stole it. It was on a presentation she had. So, but I think that's the key, because we really have one Gulf of Mexico. It's not 3 countries. So. Okay, that's all I have to say.
Thanks, Tony. And congratulations. That was a huge service to the Gulf of Mexico getting that coverage in Texas. That was a huge gaping hole in terms of HF radar coverage for many years. We do have a question from Chris Fuller. He would like to know how far south you plan the coverage for the Port Mansfield station.
See where that dot is, Chris? That's where it is, and it'll cover the whole of the Texas coast. So the whole of the Texas coast will be covered. I can't tell you exactly where that radar is going because it's politically sensitive.
No, I just didn't know if he thought it might get coverage all the way down to Brownsville, the Brownsville area, Port of Brownsville.
It will.
Okay.
It will.
Do we have other questions for Tony? You can raise your hand. You can just ask. You can put them in the chat box.
I don't see any more questions, Chris, for Tony.
Okay. Well, thank you, Tony. Appreciate that. Next up, we have Ben Williams. Ben's worked with Fugro since 2005 and currently holds the position of Med-Ocean Director Americas. He started as an oceanographic field technician, advanced to project and operations management, then service line director before landing his current position based in Houston. So if anybody knows the ins and outs of a company and their position, it has to be you, Ben. His work as an ocean engineer has taken him offshore for up to 300 days per year. I think that's astounding. I'm really impressed. As a senior oceanographer, he's provided worldwide technical support and managed both rig, mooring, and systems operations across Fugro's global companies. While doing all this work, he managed to get his master's degree in sustainable Maritime Operations from the University of Plymouth in 2021. Guess you had a little time on your hands during COVID, huh? Ben has been engaged in strategic business development and has been a leader in developing public-private academic partnerships to expand ocean research in the Gulf of Mexico. And his work really exemplifies the vision of the IU's founders to build multi-institutional, interdisciplinary observational capacity across the nation. This is really the fruition of all that work. His talk today is titled Public-Private Partnerships in Ocean Observing and Industry Perspective, and it's focused on Fugro's high-frequency radar systems and partnerships. So thanks for being here, Ben. Appreciate your time. It's all yours.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chris. Share my screen here. And there we go. Yeah, as Chris said, yeah, public-private partnerships in ocean observing. One of my favorite photos here from following our install at Fushan Island, where both radars up, and after the rain, the rainbow appeared. Really looking for that pot of gold at the end of these public-private partnerships to keep these sustained observations running. So I'll cover our current projects and partnerships within GCOOS and touch on those. Some partnerships where we've taken the example that we've set, collaborating with industry at GCOOS and transported that to some of the other regional associations, and then some partnerships with other entities that we've been exploring at Fugro. So as the HF radar network in the US, 2018, Fugro was the first industry partner to be awarded an HF coastal radar in the US as part of the IU's Closing the Gaps campaign. Fugro was well positioned to support the new installation of the 2 radar sites in Louisiana. We installed 2 long-range CODAR stations at Fushan Island and at the Southwest Pass Bar Pilot Station at the mouth of the Mississippi River. We leveraged partnerships with University of Southern Mississippi, as Dr. Howden mentioned, and Texas A&M, as Dr. Knap mentioned, to enable the project, as well as our industry partners at Chevron that have the pipeline facility there at Fushan Island, and Southwest Pass Bar Pilots Association that we've been working with on some hydrographic survey. This collaboration across the Gulf Coast Ocean Observing System has led to discussions about shared spares and shared personnel to support after hurricane response. We've heard from the other speakers on the challenges hurricanes pose. All the data from these stations are committed to the National HF Radar Network. Unfortunately, both of the Fugro stations are down due to Hurricane Ida's direct impact on them and subsequent access delays during the COVID-19 pandemic, but we hope to be back up and running here in the next month. At the Chevron pipeline facility, we've just gone through a full set of repairs of the guard shack that houses our electronics here. Hurricane Ida did not actually have storm surge damage at the shack. It was all wind damage. The door was damaged and rain coming in. Equally, the power pole that was supplying power to the guard shack was taken out. Here, a picture of the broken transmit section on the antenna and the receive dome removed from the station there. All of this in knee-deep marsh grass with coyotes, alligators, and wild hogs at the island. So the joys of juggling wildlife, not dissimilar to Tony's experience in Texas. Southwest Pass is far more civilized, but extremely exposed. The antenna section here at the pilot station, right at the end of the Mississippi River at the Crow's Foot. This has been particularly challenging because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The pilots living in rotation out here had to minimize exposure, especially with them visiting vessels. So allowing visitors to come as not critical to their mission and operation did restrict our access to this site quite a bit. We're also creates quite a challenge with a beam pattern calibration, and we have invested in a drone to be able to fly a beam pattern calibration here due to the amount of vessel traffic and the banks of the Mississippi as it flows out. So a timeline for resuming. So the Hurricane Supplemental Award was finalized mid-January. We had already proceeded with some of the repairs so that we were able to get those underway as fast as possible. We have a phase 1 training scheduled for some Fugro personnel with software training and equipment setup and data processing from CODAR coming in here in the next week. And then we have a phase 2 training as well as the remobilization end of March, where we will have CODAR personnel supporting as well as some work with USM. And then hopefully getting Southwest Pass then installed by the end of March as well, beginning of April, and we will have a fully operational system again for our HF radars. It feels like it's been a long time coming, but really pleased that it feels this close now. On to another program here. We'd heard about the National Academy's Understanding Gulf Ocean Systems in January of 2015. Fugro deployed a wavescan buoy in support of the Shell Stones FPSO arriving in the Gulf of Mexico. As many are aware, there's a notice to lessees for operating mobile drilling units and fixed production platforms in the Gulf of Mexico that requires ocean currents to be measured across the top 1,000 meters of the water column. An FPSO provides a unique challenge to measuring that ocean conditions with its spread of anchors and production risers. Shell and Fugro worked together to design a solution that met the requirements of the FPSO's operation. And the original system provided wind, wave, surface meteorological parameters, as well as ocean currents down to approximately 1,000 meters. This was a unique deployment. It had been done once before with Petrobras at an FPSO in the Gulf of Mexico, which continues to be run by Murphy. But the sort of fair principles being followed of sharing not just the required ocean currents, but also the wind, wave, and meteorological parameters that support better understanding of hurricanes and metocean conditions in the Gulf of Mexico being shared was unique. In 2018, Shell and Fugro engaged with the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Math to expand the Stones buoy system to a full ocean observation system. It's expanded the system to a dual mooring design as pictured here on the right, giving complete coverage of ocean currents through the full 3,000 meters of the water column. We didn't stop there with the Stones mooring and university collaboration. So the Stones field is 400 kilometers southwest of New Orleans, and it's nearly a 24-hour vessel transit on our standard working vessels. Shell and Fugro have invited Texas A&M students as well as University of Southern Mississippi students out onto our service cruises. Again, we ran into a bit of a hiccup with COVID-19 protocols offshore and policies both in academia and within Fugro. But we've been supporting with providing bunk space when possible and on the vessel, as well as some training and guidance in commercial oceanographic health and safety protocols. You can see a timeline here of some cruises and some instrumentation that's been installed or had a year's worth of data collection. Additionally, CTD rosette sampling from the cruises. Into a little bit of the data. So Hurricane Laura in 2020 passed directly over the Stones mooring itself. So we did see a maximum wave height in excess of 20 meters. We saw an air pressure drop to 970 millibars. We saw wind speeds here of in excess of 100 knots. the Stones mooring continued to run through this and provided important data back to IUCE and the National Weather Service. I continue to refer to this as the Shell Stones mooring, but many people know it as NDVC station 42395. Most don't know it's a Fugro owned and operated system that's providing data as a service to Shell. As mentioned by Stephen earlier, Fugro support of Navy glider recoveries. So I think this is really an important distinction to make, that Fugro doesn't operate any gliders and don't own any gliders. What we've done is established a relationship with GCOOS and the family along the Gulf Coast that when in need, we're willing to help each other out. And as an industry partner with access to vessels and even if not our own vessels, but third-party chartered vessels with standing master service agreements, we can respond extremely quickly. A couple of cases here on 13th of September 2019, I got a phone call. I think I was actually at lunch, and Barb Kirkpatrick, at the time the GCOOS director, called and said, "Oh, you don't happen to know any boat that's out in the Gulf of Mexico?" I said, "Well, I don't have a boat out in the Gulf of Mexico, but I could put a Geist boat on charter here in a matter of minutes." He said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah, I'll just execute another charter party amendment and we'll go." So we didn't start until 1 minute past midnight, so we only had to pay for the 1 day of charter on the 14th. And they headed out, picked up the glider, and we're back in port by 2:45 that afternoon. Again, on the 27th, I think it was a test 2 weeks later, Barb wanted to see whether or not I could still respond. So again, this was right on the border of the Mexican EEZ, and we set the vessel off on the 28th, collected the glider, and delivered it back to port 1st of October. So really, it's not a technical solution. It's a communication. It's a people problem, not a data problem. But the amount of savings on in getting the assets back is a key to sustaining the observation system. And it's great to be part of the team and part of the family. So on to some partnerships with other regional associations, not GCOOS specific, but really taking the lessons learned and the decades of work we have done with GCOOS and asking the likes of NERACOOS in this case, why not do the same? So South Coast Wind LiDAR Buoy. As we've pivoted into some renewables activities onto the U.S. East Coast, we're deploying LiDAR buoys for support of the development of offshore wind farms. We, as one of the joint venture partners, this is formerly Mayflower Wind. They have been renamed South Coast Wind. Shell had contracted with Fugro to provide this data collection system. We mobilized the system and collected 2 years worth of data. We publicly shared the data to NERACOOS. This allowed researchers to look at data. I know Rutgers University was looking at the data from NERACOOS and with Shell and Mayflower South Coast on that data, and this project has now completed. Another one was Atlantic Shores. So this is directly into Maracus, and we have completed the first 2 years now, and we are working on extensions that could go up to 5 years, supporting New Jersey and the New York Bight in their aspirations for clean energy. LiDAR buoys have been functioning and filling in. Again, Rutgers University doing some of the wind modeling and using the data here. So taking that public-private partnership example that we set in the Gulf of Mexico and exporting good behavior from the Gulf to the East Coast. little bit of data here. So we're able to share this data because of it being publicly available and available through the IU's regional associations. You can see here a data plot of Hurricane Henri passing the Mayflower site. Mayflower is about 30 meters of water, and we saw significant wave heights of 5 meters and a maximum wave heights in excess of 8 meters. Atmospheric pressure dropping to 1,002 millibars and wind speeds more than 55 knots. Henri was the first direct hurricane landfall in New England for 30 years. So the climate change effects being seen as we're seeing with increased number of storms and very strong conditions. And yeah, finally, Atlantic shores, again, tropical storm Isaias that passed up the eastern seaboard. The data again available at Maracus, closer to the eye, we saw excessive 75 knots in the wind profile. We saw wind-driven currents to 2 knots, making it all the way down to the seabed, as well as the air pressure falling to 1,000 millibars. I know I'm running a bit low on time here, but I'll touch briefly on a couple of other partnerships with other entities. So Fugro has been working for the past 5 years with Seabed 2030 initiative that's now a UN Ocean Decade endorsed program. Initiating crowdsourced bathymetry program, we acquire multi-beam data between our transits as we move vessels continent to continent, project to project. We've contributed more than 2 million kilometers squared of in-transit bathymetry data. Again, it's a mindset shift. We perform bathymetric surveys and geophysical surveys for our client specific sites, and this data, of course, is owned by the client and non-accessible. But when we need to move that vessel from Northern Europe to the U.S. or to the Gulf of Mexico, that transit in between, we are tracking where we are sailing and going and picking up additional kilometers of bathymetry data that is Fugro owned data then, and can be contributed as in kind to support the Seabed 2030 initiative. And then NOAA opportunistic mapping. So in 2019, Fugro partnered with NOAA OER, the Ocean Exploration and Research Office, to establish a new opportunistic approach as we're mapping areas of the U.S. EEZ. So we've had a 25-year relationship with NOAA, and partnership precipitated from discussions that occur regularly where the party shares information about how activities are going and where areas are needed to be mapped and surveyed. So in this case, we were transiting between the Gulf of Mexico and the wind activities we were performing for clients in New England. And because we were passing the area and we had a couple of days spare for our transit, we were able to commit to NOAA that we could collect this area without any mobilization fee paid for by them, which increased the budget for them to be able to conduct additional surveying, and we were able to pick up and commit and complete this survey for them. So that's really caps my talk off. I think we got a lot of the technical details and information about the HF radars from Stephen and Tony, and hopefully I've captured how Fugro has been engaged in participating with GCOOS and a proud member of the team and the family on the Gulf Coast.
Thank you, Ben. That was really informative, and really a lot of work's been done to advance that capacity across all of these agencies, academia, industry. It's been really productive to see the work that you're doing. Do we have questions for Ben? We've got plenty of time. You can put them in the chat box, raise your hand. You guys must be mesmerized, or everybody's ready for an afternoon siesta. I'm not sure which. Questions, comments, thoughts?
Chris was logging in to see if they were all running because he helped me write the original proposal for those radars back in 2018 when he was at Fugro. So good to see you on board, Chris.
I do have a question for you. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
No, just glad to see things are going, Ben, and good to see you again. So
yeah, thanks.
What do you see as the biggest challenges as far as, a lot of people want the new sexy toys going in the water, but nobody wants to pay for the operations and maintenance on these things. So as far as the timeline where they are now compared to 5-10 years out, what kind of investments do you see needed to have full coverage of the region?
Ooh. Yeah, I mean it really is the challenge, right? And I think some of it's going to be following the flavor of the month. We've had a bit of time of ocean observation. We see some coastal resilience funding coming in now as ocean observations are a coastal resilience problem as well, and we need to communicate better how we can collaborate and follow the money, whether it's in Inflation Reduction Act or IIJA that's coming out. Sustained observations are a commerce problem, a people problem, an ocean science problem. So I don't have a number off the top of my head, but I think the investment in IUS and the regional associations is what's key for keeping the sustained observations running.
And I have one other short question for you if nobody else does. I'm being a very bad moderator, asking my own questions. I apologize. But do you have a community user group like you do for the underwater glider user group, to where you can share resources and expertise and possibly a centralized location for parts replacement and things like that? Or being on the private industry side of it, very different?
Yeah, no, I mean on private industry we tend to service our own equipment. I know we've had some discussions at previous GCOOS meetings with Tony, Stephen, Kerry Wilden, Jorge on how we bring together a store of spares, and I have offered up. It's very easy for me to hold a store like that as private industry. As I don't, it doesn't get added to it gets added to an asset register, but not one that's then tied to a state or a state entity or a university. So whatever I can do to help facilitate if private industry enables that, I'm willing to.
That group's been really productive, and a lot of really important relationships have evolved from it. So it just seems like a great model for other areas of specialty as well. One final opportunity for thoughts or questions for Ben.
Chris, I wanted to share that I really enjoyed the presentations presented by Ben, Tony, and Stephen today. I work with them on a weekly basis, sometimes on a daily basis, and I always learn something from all of them. And something that really struck me and continues to be an issue that keeps us united. It's how do we keep maintaining these equipments that they're relatively fragile, because they are in the shoreline, right on the shoreline, one of the most dynamic places to be anywhere. So really appreciate the effort that all of you guys do in maintaining and keeping up with these essential equipments. I mean, we know how hard it is. We will. I hope that we are able to work together in expanding that network. I mean, Tony Knapp showed us what he has start doing, and from Quintana Roo, from the Caribbean, and the Mexicans are also challenged to maintain the network of so many radars around Mexico. But even us here, I mean, we have big gaps. We are trying to look for solutions together, and I hope that we can continue finding opportunities in the future. So very happy to hear about the new radars. For example, the one in South Texas that Tony just shared with us. We're looking forward for that, and also to see Ben's new old radars come back online in the spring this year as planned. So thank you so much for that, and to all of you. And Ben, thank you for that additional collaboration that you mentioned that we do with you and do you with not just with GCOOS but with IU's network. But I really appreciate, and I hope that to the future we can continue working together, as we are an offshore organization with no really assets to reach out the many places that we would like to do. So the services that you provide and the help that you support that you provide, it's really essential for us to reach out that far into the Gulf of Mexico. So thank you for that.
I'd like to add one thing that I didn't mention, that in December we were able to send a CODAR trainer to Mexico and train 8 people from the Park Service to UNAM personnel, scientists, etc., in HF radar operations, sighting, etc. So we feel pretty good that that was a big step in development. And so now it was all done in Spanish, so it was good.
Oh, it's great, Tony.
That is excellent. Well, I want to echo what Jorge said. Thanks very much to our speakers, Stephan, Ben, and Tony today. It was really informative. Jorge, thank you for serving as our technical advisor while Jen was out today. I know you had to change your plans to do that, so we really appreciate it. And thanks to everybody for joining us today. We hope to see you next week. We have our 4th week of presentations. We'll be looking at products derived from satellite remote sensing from Drs. Nan Walker and Frank Muller-Carter. So until then, be well, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks, everybody.